Okay, this is Chapter 1, Volume 1, A Reckoning. In the house of my parents. Today it seems to me providential that fate should have chosen Bruno Fauna on the inn as my birthplace. For this little town lies on the boundary between two German states, which we of the younger generation at least have made it our life work to reunite by every means at our disposal. German Austria must return to the great German mother country, and not because of any economic considerations. No, and again, no. Even if such a union were unimportant from an economic point of view, yes, even if it were harmful, it must nonetheless take place. One blood demands one Reich. Never will the German nation possesses the moral right to engage in colonial politics until at least it embraces its own sons within a single state. Um, uh, Only which the Reich borders include the very last German, but can no longer guarantee his daily bread, will the moral right to acquire foreign soil arise from the distress of our own people. Their sword will become our plow, and from the tears of war the daily bread of future generations will grow. And so this little city on the border seems to me the symbol of a great mission, and in another respect as well, it looms as a abomination to the present day. More than 100 years ago, this insignificant place had the distinction of being immortalized in the annals of least of German history, for it was the scene of a tragic catastrophe which gripped the entire German nation. At the time of the fatherland's deepest humiliation, uh, Jonas Palm of Nürnberg, Burger, bookseller, uncompromising nationalist, and French hater, died there for the Germany which he loved so passionately, even in his misfortune. He had stubbornly refused to denounce his accomplishments, who were in fact his superiors, and this is reassembled Leo Schlosser. And like him, he was denounced to the French by the representative of his government, and Augsburg police chief won this unenviable fame, thus frustrating an example of our modern German officials in hair-serving Reich. In this little town on the Inn, got gilded by the rays of German martyrdom, Bavarian by blood, technically Austrian, lived my parents in the late 80s of the past century. My father, a dutiful civil servant, my mother giving all her being to the household and devoted above all to us children in an eternal loving care. Little remains in my memory of this period, for after a few years my father had to leave the little border city he had learned to love, moving down the Inn to a new position in a Passau, that is, in German proper. In those days, constant moving was the lot of an Austrian customs official. A short time later, my father was sent to Linz, and there he was finally pensioned. Yet, indeed, this was not to mean quote unquote rest for the old gentleman. In his younger days as the son of a poor cottager, he couldn't bear to stay at home. Before he was even 13, the little boy laced his teeny knapsack and ran away from his home in the Waldviertel, despite the attempts of experienced villagers to dissuade him. He made his way to Vienna, there to learn a trade. This was in the 50s of the past century. A desperate decision to take to the road with only 3 gulden for travel money, and plunged into the unknown. By the time the 13-year-old grew to be 17, he had passed his apprentice examination, but he was not yet content. On the contrary, the long period of hardship, endless misery, and suffering he had gone through strengthened his determination to give up his trade and become something better. Formerly, the poor boy had regarded the priest as an embodiment of all humanly attainable heights. Now, in the big city, which had so greatly widened his perspective, it was the rank of civil servant, with all the tendency of a young man whom suffering and care had made old while still half a child. The 17-year-old clung to his new decision. He did enter the civil service, and after nearly 23 years, I believe he reached his goal. Thus, he seemed to have fulfilled a vow which he had made as a poor boy, that he would not return to his beloved native village until he made something of himself. His goal was achieved, but no one in the village could remember the little boy of former days, and to whom the village had grown strange. When finally, at age 56, he went into retirement, he could not bear to spend a single day of his leisure in idleness. Near the upper Austrian market village of Lambeck, he bought a farm which he worked himself, and thus, in the circuit of a long and industrious life, returned to the origins of his forefathers. It was at this time that the first ideal took shape in my breast. All my playing about in the open, the long walk to school, and particularly my association with the extremely husky boys, which sometimes caused my mother bitter anguish, made me the very opposite of stay at home. And although at the time I scarcely had any serious ideas as to the profession I should one day pursue, my sympathies were in any case not in the direction of my father's career. I believe that even in my oratorical talent was being developed in the form of more or less violent arguments with my schoolmates. I had become a little ringleader. At school I learned easily and at that time very well, but was otherwise rather hard to handle. Since in my free time I received singing lessons in the cloister at Lambeck, I had excellent opportunity to intoxicate myself with the solemn splendor of the brilliant church festivals. As was only natural, the abbot seemed to me that, as the village priest had once seemed to my father, the highest and most desirable ideal. For a time, at least, this was the case. But since my father, for understandable reasons, proved unable to appreciate the oratorical talents of his pugnacious boy, or to draw from them any favorable conclusions regarding the future of his offspring, he could, it goes without saying, achieve no understanding for such youthful ideas. With concern he observed this conflict of nature. As it happened, my temporary aspiration for this profession was in any case soon to vanish, making place for hopes more suited to my temperament. Rummaging through my father's library, I come across various books of a military nature, among them a popular edition of the Franco-German War of 1870-71. It consisted of 2 issues of illustrated periodical from those years, which now became my favorite reading matter. It was not long before the great heroic struggle had become my greatest inner experience. From then I became more and more enthusiastic about everything that was in any way connected with war, or, for that matter, with soldiering. But in another respect as well, this was to assume importance for me. For the first time, though as yet in a confused form, the question was forced upon my consciousness: Was there a difference, and if so, what difference between the Germans who fought these battles and other Germans? Why hadn't Austria taken part of this war? Why hadn't my father known others fought? Are we not the same as other Germans? Do we not all belong together? The problem began to gnaw at my little brain for the first time. I asked cautious questions, and with secret envy, uh, received the answer that not every German was fortunate enough to belong to Birming's Reich. This was more than I could understand. So, with just a few pages and everything, you get so far the idea that he was uh, very much a troubled child, getting into fights. His father, because of how his father lived, he wanted his child, in a sense, to have same, not the exact, but have the inspiration that he got, although he wouldn't really be going through the same tribulations, or whatever the word is. He wouldn't go through the same life, footsteps as his father would have gone through growing up, because he had a loving home and everything. He didn't feel like he had to leave to get things done, or whatever, and to which get inspiration to do things, be a civil servant and all this other stuff. But he was more tamed to war and everything. And yeah, I know a lot of people at a young age get interested in war and everything, a history of war at that age. But it almost seems like, with knowing the overall outcome of what happened with Hitler, that it's like a very bad idea that happened and troublesome. Let me know your thoughts of what we read so far down in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't yet, with the notification bar, because there's going to be a lot more of me reading this information from what it's in Minecraft.